I'm a former police officer. 10 years on late shifts in a Dutch canal city where the houses lean like old friends and trouble hides behind lace curtains. The job leaves you with two kinds of nights, the ones you file and the one that recalibrates your compass. Mine started with North Sea rain that came sideways and stung like a dare, and a dispatch that tightens every muscle even when you've heard it 1,000 times. Possible domestic. Neighbors reported screaming, heavy thuds, a woman crying out. In our world, those words mean move, but also measure. I had Keese beside me, steady partner, unflappable, the kind of presence that lowers everyone's pulse until it needs to raise yours. We cut the siren a block early so we wouldn't turn the street into a stage. Brick row houses, bicycles chained to polite signs, the orange hush of kitchen light behind every curtain. The neighbor who called watched us through a sliver in her blinds, wearing the face of someone praying to be wrong. I've kicked doors where silence lay on the floor like broken glass. I've walked couples out past wedding photos that still smiled. That weight rode the steps with me as I knocked in the tone that says, "We're coming in if you don't open." A man answered in nothing but underwear and the kind of alarm that wants to pass as innocence. He lifted his hands and said they were just playing a game. You never buy it at the door. You ask to see the person the story's about. He hesitated, half-breath only, but half-breaths matter, then said they had been downstairs. He used the word like a password and a stall. 10 minutes later, I stood in a basement engineered like a lesson. Hardware sunk into beams, padding where it should be, safeties where you hope to find them, and the supposed victim was suspended by choice, calm enough to give a briefing on safety words, while Keese and I tried to figure out how to rescue people who didn't want rescuing. We had come for a fight. We found consent louder than the noise. That would be a neat ending if the job were a montage. Real nights sprawl. What taught me the most wasn't the room itself, but everything around it. The seconds before and after, the paperwork, the neighbor, the debrief in the car when the rain softened to drizzle and left us with our thoughts. If you have not worked domestics, it's hard to explain how the hallways feel. They hold a kind of pressurized air, like an elevator that hasn't chosen a floor yet. Policy says you treat every scene as both real and possibly wrong. Training drills it in. Stand where a door can't hit you, keep one eye on hands and the other on exits, speak like you have all night and move like you don't. The mistakes that get officers hurt are rarely cinematic. They are simple, embarrassed seconds where someone assumes and then acts. Keese and I could do the dance asleep. I introduced us, asked for the partner, kept my hands visible, let my tone be the boring kind of firm. The man kept repeating that this was a game. He was not belligerent. He was mortified. That didn't change our job. We needed to see her, hear her say freely that she was safe, and check that any marks on her body matched the story she wanted to tell. He tried the warrant question, and I answered in the patient way that says, a warrant can be arranged, but meanwhile, we won't wait in the rain. He tried the privacy angle, and I reminded him that privacy is not a shield when someone might be harmed.
The house upstairs was ordinary to the point of parody. Mugs on hooks, a cutting board still wet, a cat asleep on a chair, assuming this was none of its business. No overturned furniture, no broken glass. I felt the metallic tang before I knew what it was. A mix of stainless steel, cleaner rubber. He led us to the cellar door. New handle, good hinges. He opened it and stood aside like a man letting paramedics reach a fainted guest. The stairs dropped to a room that looked less like vice than infrastructure. Not a mess, not a hideout. A system. Along one wall, coils of rope hung in loops like climbing gear. On another, padded cuffs arranged by size, their buckles dull with use but not neglect. There was a beam with an electric hoist rated for weight, the rating plate actually visible, a detail I would not have noticed before this call.
The floor under the central rig was a thick rubber mat. Off to the side lay a small table with a first aid kit, bottled water, towels, hand disinfectant, and a set of blunt-tip shears. It was, frankly, safer than some gyms. And there, in the center, suspended with knees bent and weight distributed like someone who had practiced, was a woman. She was not terrified. She was irritated. She looked at us the way you look at someone who's opened a bathroom door you thought you had locked. Her eyes flicked from me to Keys to the man and back, and then she did exactly what I needed her to do. She spoke in a calm, unforced voice that said she was okay, this was consensual, and the neighbors had probably heard one of the scenes where yelling was the point. She used the word scene matter-of-factly, like the word meeting. She asked us to give her a minute so she could be untied safely. She pointed with her chin toward the release system that would lower her gently. Then she recited the check she and her partner used. Aftercare plan, safe words, gestures in case of gag, water, food, warm blanket upstairs. We still had to see, not just hear. Consent is more than vocabulary. It's body language, the way eyes move, the way a sentence lands. Keys asked her, carefully, to confirm in her own words that she wanted us to leave them to it. She confirmed, still irritated. There were faint marks on wrists and thighs, but they matched the equipment and were not the kind that made your stomach drop. I watched the partner's hands as he worked the release. Steady, practiced, respectful. He didn't rush to touch her except where safety required it. He kept explaining what he was doing, not for our benefit, but for hers, a rhythm that sounded like the inside of trust. We gave them a sheet from our kit because people in shock can be cold, whether from fear or adrenaline or both. She laughed once, the kind of laugh that says she knows exactly how ridiculous the tableau looks, and asked if we also carried tea. Keys, who has a soft spot for civility, said the kettle upstairs still looked hot.
In some countries, I've since learned, this might have turned into confiscations and lectures. In ours, the law cares about age, consent, coercion, public nuisance, and injuries that need reporting. Not about adults doing adult things in a private basement designed to prevent harm. Still, noise is noise. Neighbors shouldn't have to guess if the screaming next door means a crime. We explained that and asked them to consider soundproofing or scheduling scenes earlier in the evening. She accepted the point with the resigned grace of someone who likes living in a community and would prefer it not hate her. We took names and dates of birth, checked IDs, ran the bare minimum through the system. No warrants, no red flags. In the report I later wrote, I chose my words carefully. Welfare check. No indicators of non-consensual harm. Parties advised on noise and privacy. No further action. The sentence I wanted to write was the one I carry in my head. We responded to our own assumptions and learned something. Reports are not essays. They are artifacts of accountability. The learning you write elsewhere. If you're smart, you write it on yourself. Upstairs, the neighbor had lingered behind her curtains long enough to catch our eye when we came out. We crossed to her stoop to close the loop. It is important when people risk being the one who called that we return with respect, even if the outcome is awkward. We thanked her. We told her she had done the correct thing. We said the noise had an explanation and that we had addressed it. She didn't need details she hadn't asked for. Her face worked through a sequence that ended in relief and something like embarrassment. Relief that nobody was being hurt against their will, embarrassment at the human fact of living close to other humans. She told us the crying had sounded too real. I told her she had done exactly what we hope neighbors do. When in doubt, call. Back in the car, we did the ritual we always did after a call that left us thinking. We debriefed without bravado. Kees, who has known grief too intimately to mock other people's hobbies, said he felt as if we'd walked into a classroom by mistake. Safe words on the whiteboard, syllabus on the wall, the kind of order that makes chaos ask permission. I admitted I had been ready for the worst and that the smell of metal had pulled a lever inside me I didn't realize I had. He said experience makes levers. Humility learns where they are.
I wrote the report with coffee cooling beside me, choosing nouns that named without sneering. In training, we teach rookies to write for the courtroom, and for the colleague who reads your notes at 3 a.m. when the night has already taken 5 turns. I added a line to the advice section. Consider community education pieces reminding residents they can call without needing certainty. It seemed important to praise the neighbor's instinct instead of making her feel foolish. You might expect the story to end there. It didn't. Weeks later, the same address surfaced again, this time as a follow-up request from the couple. They wanted to speak to the officers who came, if we were available. Requests like that arrive rarely, and when they do, most supervisors prefer a pair who wasn't at the original call. Mine trusted us. He said go, wear plain clothes, keep it brief.
We found them in their kitchen at noon on a Saturday, normal clothes replacing the theatricality of that first night. They had printed out a short guide from a community group about consent and safety in adult play. They wanted us to see it, to know they weren't improvising danger. They asked whether there was a way to note in our internal system that noise from their address, if reported again, might have this context. We explained data protection and discretion. We can record facts from previous calls, but we don't tag people in ways that could be misused. Better, we said, to be on good terms with neighbors and to control the sound. They surprised me by asking to hear what the call had looked like from our side, what the neighbor had said, what we saw, what we were thinking when we came through the door. Sometimes members of the public ask those questions as a prelude to argument. These two asked like students. So we told them the words dispatch used, the checklist that starts running, the policy about seeing and hearing the partner, the way we try to keep assumptions from becoming orders. The woman listened with the same attentive calm she'd used to narrate her own safety checks that night. She said she appreciated that we had not touched her without asking first. I felt a sharp, unexpected pride at something that should be unremarkable. Before we left, the man asked a question I have only heard once in my career, whether we ever debrief about our own wrong guesses, the times when the story we brought didn't match the story in front of us. I told him yes. I told him it keeps us honest. I told him I had mentally written a bad ending on their door because I had heard it before and because doors can't argue with you until they open. He said that made sense. He said the noise would be handled. He offered coffee again. We declined. You keep boundaries not because the last call didn't blur them, but so the next one won't. Word of the call traveled in the station with the speed of anything that breaks tension. Cops make jokes because the alternative is mildew. I laughed along, 2 adults, ropes, awkward officers, ha. But in quieter minutes, I kept turning it over like a stone. Policing invites you to ossify. Confidence becomes cement, procedure becomes ritual, cynicism looks like wisdom if you wear it long enough. This call had cracked the shell just enough to remind me what I liked about the job when I started. Being useful to reality, not to the story I wanted reality to tell. A month later, training night came around, and I had a room full of rookies who still polished their boots like superstition. I told them the story without the punchlines. I told them what the house smelled like, where my partner stood, how the neighbor's face looked when we thanked her, how the woman in the basement spoke as if she had rehearsed taking care of herself because she had. I told them the report words I used and the ones I kept for myself. I told them certainty is a knife you should only draw when you must. Mostly, I told them to bring humility with their gloves.
You want an epilogue? There is one of sorts. A year after I left the force, I ran into Keys at the market by the canal where tulips insist on being photographed. We were in civilian clothes, which makes everyone look shorter. He asked if I remembered the basement call. Of course I did. He said the couple had moved, bigger place, not far, and the neighbor who'd once called had brought them plants for their new garden. He grinned at the absurdity of a city where the quiet resolution is a housewarming. Then he shrugged and said that was policing too. Most nights aren't battles. Most are conversations the world needs you to start or end at the right time. I live a different life now. I teach conflict de-escalation to people who live in human weather. Nurses, school staff, bus drivers. Sometimes I use the basement story. I strip it of the details that make it gossip and keep the parts that make it a tool. The smell that triggered the wrong script. The neighbor who called because she cared. The equipment arranged like respect. The careful hands. The report that told the truth without theater.
I tell rooms full of civilians what I wish someone had told me in my first month, that help is loud when it needs to be, quiet when it should be, and always allergic to certainty. On bad news days, the dramatic calls still visit. They always will. But the night I return to most often is the one with rain on the row houses and an embarrassed man in underwear and a woman who looked us in the eye and used calm words to pull 2 officers out of a script that didn't belong to them. We left with no arrests, no trophy, just a note about noise, and a reminder that my job worked best when I let the world be complicated and then acted inside that truth. People ask whether that night changed how I approached real domestics. The answer is yes, and in the only way that matters. I got better at listening without losing the will to move. I still knocked hard when I had to. I still shouldered doors when silence pressed the air flat. But I also left more rooms without shouting. I asked more questions I thought I already knew the answers to, and I let the answers surprise me. We carry our mistakes because they warn us. We carry our lessons because they keep the warnings from turning into fear. That call gave me a lesson generous enough to cover more than one street. Consent is a language, not a vibe. Neighbors are part of the safety net. Procedure is not a cage, it's a path. And certainty is a story that tries to finish itself before you've met the characters. When I think about policing now, from the distance of normal clothes and a desk that doesn't roll, I don't picture badges or blue light. I picture a staircase into a room engineered to keep harm out, and 2 officers slowing their breath enough to hear a woman who didn't need saving tell them so. I picture the walk back up through the ordinary house, the cat blinking, the umbrella in its stand, the neat row of shoes, and the rain waiting to turn us into silhouettes. I picture Keys in the passenger seat, tapping his report book, saying that humility fits in a pocket better than certainty. And then the car starts, the wipers find their rhythm, and the city keeps living on the other side of the glass. Kitchens, noise, love, mistakes, neighbors, and the thin line between our assumptions and the truth, which on good nights is no line at all, just a door that opens and makes us better at our jobs.